we have next up a book set in the world of one of my favorite standalone fantasy novels of all time by one of my favorite fantasy authors of all time. Katherine Addison has a new, actually technically Katherine Addison has a, like, what is it? She has she has 2 books coming out this year, both set in the world of the Goblin Emperor. And one of the first one that I just finished, it's a relatively short book, called The Orb of Cairado, I think is how it's pronounced. It's Cairado. It is short. It is 172 pages. 172? 120, excuse me, 120 pages. It is a short novella set in the same world as the Goblin Emperor, not tied to the other trilogy with our necromancer priest and goblin opera writer. Instead, this is a academic artifact heist novelette. And it is, I love Katherine Addison's world. I love this book series. I love the world in which it's written. I have so much love for this series. I will say, first things first, if you have not read The Goblin Emperor, this book, you could technically read this independently, but so much of the world will not make sense because so much of the world building is in The Goblin Emperor. And you're like, this will not make as much sense. But it is a very, like, again, it's a short novel. It's 120 pages, very quick read. It's an interesting thought process. So Goblin Emperor itself is a standalone, right? The book, The Goblin Emperor, is a standalone. But then Katherine Addison has gone back and written a trilogy of short novels based on one of the side characters in the Goblin Emperor book. That has nothing to do with the main plot of the Goblin Emperor book. It is just one of the characters in that book leaves the court, and this is what he does when he, Witness for the Dead, Grief of Stones, and now Tomb of Dragons is coming in March. The Orb of Cairado is a novel set in the same world with characters who are just entire. So, like, the main character in this book starts at, and we go back to, like, the premise of the actual Goblin Emperor, and the premise of the Goblin Emperor is that the main character is the youngest son of the Emperor, and he is only half elf. His mother was a goblin. It was supposed to be like this political marriage. She dies, and he's kind of sent away to live in the Goblin Emperor. He's sent away to live in a country house, like just basic servants, while his father and his older brothers, who are all full elves and are, run the country. Well, then the opening of the book is literally that the airship that the Emperor and his sons were on exploded, and this half elf, half goblin inherits the throne, and what he has to do to deal with the political fallout, all of that. Also, the question of whether or not his father and brothers were murdered and assassinated, if there's a possibility of whatever. Yeah. Kid is the fourth spare until, exactly, giant explosion. Actually, I think he's like seventh in line or something. There's like multiple people in front of him. And then totally not trained for political. Exactly, totally not trained for anything. And then the Orb of Cairado, the main character in this book, is a much is this is much less political thriller. It is a academic heist book. The main character was a history professor and in charge of a bunch of artifacts at the university. And when we meet him at the beginning of the book, he's been fired, he's been let go from the university because an item, the Orb of one of these particular items has been stolen, and he's basically the convenient fall guy because he's the lowest man on the totem pole and whatever. And then we start the book at the time of the explosion of the Emperor's airship, because the main character in the Orb of Cairado is friends with one of the people who worked on the airship, right? Like, that was his job. It was like just the technicians and the engineers on the ship. And this is much more a look at how, well, we have the academic heist going on as the main plot. We also have the lower level look at the other people's reactions to the Emperor's airship being destroyed, right? Like the lower peons, not the court, not the politics that the main character in the Goblin Emperor, Marin, oh god, what's his name? What is his name? What is his actual name? Dang it. Anyways, the main character in The Goblin Emperor is that book is very heavily about politics and political tensions and other things. And The Orb of Cairado is about other people reacting to the Emperor, like the common, quote unquote, common people, middle class and lower class people reacting to the destruction and the death of the Emperor, but also looking at the fact that there were other people on, like, right? Like, there's an entire staff, the pilots, the engineers, the wait staff, all on this airship, and they all died as well. And how do you deal with grief of that situation when the public grief of the Emperor and his sons and their families, and then the issue of, like, the new Emperor is coming in? So it's a very kind of tense look at things. It's a very short book. It's very, very well done. Firmly recommend for anyone who enjoyed the Goblin Emperor. And I think it's a very quick kind of read. But you get to, whatever. And I think I will say you have to, plot-wise, you don't have to have read The Goblin Emperor to read this. But for world building, so much of the world building isn't... Katherine Addison doesn't explain things in her world building. She just kind of dumps you into it and assumes that you will, follow along and get there by, context clues and understanding. But because of that, so many of the things that are kind of like understood and become explained in The Goblin Emperor are then used in the Orb of Cairado. Cairado. Yeah, I like the not being led around by the nose by her writing. Yeah. It very much... and it's so... But because of that, there are a bunch of things that you're like, what? If you haven't read The Goblin Emperor, you should. Hey, go read The Goblin Emperor. Go read all of Katherine Addison. Just read all of